Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I take this privilege to warmly welcome you to the 64th lecture of our lecture series. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of academic study of Indian languages and literatures envisioned by Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee and introduced in 1919 at the University of Calcutta. Later in 2005, a new department called Comparative Indian Languages and Literatures was established, which still continues to carry research in Indian languages. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 took inspiration from this history, and it is a platform for sharing research interests and ideas. We are organizing online lectures on various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by academicians and distinguished research scholars of different fields. Your remarkable skills will be a great addition to our team. We look forward to a mutually beneficial relationship with you. Thank you for joining us today. Now I would like to request our host, Aratrika Ganguly, to introduce the speaker. Aratrika.
Hello. Thank you, Suparna, for this lovely introduction. A very good evening to all of you, and a very good evening to our speaker of the day, Auritra Munshi, as well. Dr. Auritra Munshi is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Raiganj University. He is a co-editor of the volume entitled Border and Bordering, Poetics, Politics, Precariousness, published in ABDM Press 2020. He has published many articles in international and national journals. His area of research interest includes South Asian diaspora, post-colonialism, and subaltern studies. Thank you, Dr. Auritra Munshi, for joining us today on our 64th lecture. He will be talking on diasporic subjectivity, changing contours of Jhumpa Lahiri's works. The virtual floor is all yours, sir. Now you can begin your lecture.
Okay, thank you. So, good evening to all of you present here virtually who are watching this particular program. And I would like to convey my special thanks to the entire Calcutta Comparatists group for organizing such a beautiful lecture series. And obviously, I am very grateful to them for inviting me on this beautiful, engaging platform. So the topic which I'll be discussing on, and the title of my topic is, as mentioned earlier, is that diasporic subjectivity, changing contours of Jhumpa Lahiri's works. So before entering into this topic, I would like to say that how Jhumpa Lahiri has entered into the entire realm of world literature, because Jhumpa Lahiri is a very prolific woman diasporic novelist who retains a luminous halo around the world literature by means of her beautiful creations. She has written rather so many, that means fictions as well as non-fictions. She has written rather interpreter abilities, the short story collections for which she has attained Pulitzer Prize in 2000. She has short story collections, another short story collections, Unaccustomed Earth. She has written novel like Namesake, and obviously she has written The Lowland, and this book has been nominated for Man Booker Prize as well. Recently, she has started writing Italian, that means non-fictions in Italian language, which has been translated right now in English as well. So we find that what is the changing dimension of Jhumpa Lahiri's works? This is the most interesting thing, because Jhumpa Lahiri cannot be considered as merely a South Asian writer, because she has a kind of emancipatory potential to dismantle all sorts of boundaries of categorizing herself within any particular, that means parameters, because she has a kind of emancipatory potential. So her writings and novels, her fictions and non-fictions cannot be circumscribed to any particular categorization. So Jhumpa Lahiri for the first time we know, is an Indian descendant born in UK, and then she has migrated to USA, and right now she is in Italy. And because of her liminal style, that means thematic technique and liminal style, we know that she has she has created a niche in the world literature as well. She is not merely considered as an ethnic writer, or rather I should say she is not merely considered as a South Asian writer. She is beyond. She has a kind of the transnational characteristics, so far as her writings are concerned. So we know that how this kind of, that means in 1960s onwards, when the Immigration Act passed in America, we know how lots of people belonging to South Asian countries, they are gradually migrating to the USA and the UK, and USA especially, in order to create their existence in the foreign territory, in order to educate themselves, in order to create their existence in the in the foreign soil. But the problem is somewhere else. They had to go through, a diasporic character has to go through a kind of the sufferings, that has to go through a kind of the predicament, has to go through a kind of the pain, loss. These are the things, are common features. And the world in which they live and the world in which they aspire to live, there is a wide gulf, and there is a kind of the contestation going on between the world in which they live and the world in which they aspire to live. And that is somehow related to the contestations of their cultural values, their their other things as well. So which is actually giving a kind of the variety. So far as the diasporic subjectivity is concerned, it is not a that has made the diasporic subjectivity much more liminal, so far as the subjectivity is concerned. So we also can get to realize, if we look at the American context in this connection, as I mentioned that 1965, that means the Immigration Act passed in America. But we know that America has a kind of tendency always to look at the immigrants or the expatriates, basically coming from the Asian and the South Asian countries, with lots of ambiguity. They are always trying to, they usually try to impose their cultural, that means rules and regulations upon that means expatriate, the immigrants, and they are also trying to be one with the host cultural milieus. But the thing is that the problem is, there is a kind of, that means surveillance, and American people, American society, the nation state ideology of America is always trying to prove them as un-American. So it is pretty sure that there is a kind of the dichotomy between the center and the periphery is prominent. So Jhumpa Lahiri, we know, since she has a global soul, she's always trying to dismantle this kind of binarization. That means center versus periphery. This binarization she has continuously tried to dismantle, because she is talking about the transnationalism, she is talking about the translation. So we know that diasporic characters are translator, we know we are the translated man, but Jhumpa Lahiri has talking about a kind of the cultural translation. To her, through translation, we are just trying to have, we can gain something, we can lose something. It is a kind of the journey, but that journey has no vanishing point. There is no particular finishing point, so far as this diasporic journey is concerned, according to Lahiri. But at the same time, we know that this, what is the meaning of the translation? Because we know, if we just try to find out the etymological meaning of translation, we find that this English word translation is basically derived from the word translatio. Translatio is, trans means going beyond, and translatio means across the border, going beyond the borders, across the continent. So translation is something is which the diasporic characters celebrate, they are actually trying to embrace. So Jhumpa Lahiri, so far as Jhumpa Lahiri is concerned, she says that yes, translation is quite important, and this translation is somehow related to the cultural translation as well. And since Jhumpa Lahiri has tried to dismantle the center versus periphery binary, so we know that this cultural, that means the translation can be discussed by bringing in Homi Bhabha's conception of dissemination, when in which Hemi Bhabha has tried to bring in untranslatability, the concept of untranslatability, by referring to the tasks of a translator written by Walter Benjamin. So you know where it is being clearly stated that when the vessel has fallen apart, we know that each and every particle is bearing the sense of loss, so each and every particle since bearing is bearing the sense of loss. That means that particular particle is the version of that vessels, they are not, this is what is called the untranslatability. Each and every particle is bearing the sense of loss, and that is somehow related to a kind of the fragmented individuals. Diasporic individuals are the fragmented individuals. So each of their experiences are different, but they cannot be considered almost like the same. They cannot return to the same, but they are the part and parcel of that particular vessels. And there is a kind of the untranslatability is there. They're always, each and every particle is trying to survive by means of the performance on their own, but they are the part and parcel of that particular vessels. So this loss becomes quite important so far as the cultural translation is concerned. And Jhumpa Lahiri feels that her characters are translated in her beautiful essay Intimate Alienation, which was published in 2002. She says that I quote, almost all her characters are translated insofar as they must make sense of the foreignness in order to survive. That means the survival mechanism is quite important, according to Lahiri. And she is continuously trying to prove the stature of the diasporic individual as nomadic, as non-identity. As that means she is not talking about the fixity of any particular diasporic individual. So according to me, it's a kind of the journey. It is a kind of, that means she is talking about the heterogeneity so far as the diasporic subjectivity is concerned. So she says that I translate, therefore I am. So according to him, that she feels that translation becomes quite important. So she says that I translate, therefore I am. So far as diasporic subjectivity is concerned, we know our diasporic subjectivity is related to the heterogeneity. It is a heterogeneity, and that means that is not talking about any kind of any fixity, but rather it is talking about a kind of the fluidity. And so far as the subjectivity is concerned, if we look at Immanuel Kant, we know Immanuel Kant has talked about two kinds of that means self. One is the empirical subject, another is the transcendental self. And when we are talking about it in postmodern condition, standing on the postmodern condition, if we look at the subjectivity, we know that Lyotard has placed diasporic subjectivity at institutional nodal points, which is constituted through the mobile fabric of relations and performances. So that is, it has its own inherent instability at the same time, that keeps on changing by means of performance. And if we look at that subjectivity, if we say the subjectivity can be placed in that means the cultural parlance, we know that this subjectivity is very much premised upon the transcultural encounter, and that is somehow leading towards the globalization, that is global soul, that helps the characters a kind of the global soul. And Jhumpa Lahiri is also believing in this global soul. So when Jhumpa Lahiri says that I translate, therefore I am, and which is somehow attuned to Cartesian principle, I think, therefore I am, almost like that. So on the one hand, thinking thinking of herself as being and translating herself as an individual is actually evolves her personality from being to becoming. So it's a kind of she is trying to opening up her possibilities throughout her writing. And that is why we know that how, as earlier I mentioned in my at the beginning of my discussions, that how American civilization is trying to create a kind of the binarization, a dichotomy between the center and periphery. We know the how Jhumpa Lahiri is trying to dismantle this kind of barrier, and where she is trying to write on her own in order to dismantle this kind of binarization. Rather, she is referring to the proliferation of selves, heterogeneities of the subjectivity, which is yet to be specified, which is yet to be circumscribed to any particular space, time, and location. So she has a kind of emancipatory potential. She is transnational. Her writings are transnational in this connection, we can say. So this transcultural encounter is going on, and it is also giving to her, that means novels or her writings, a different sort of nuances. And that's why probably she has attained her position in the mainstream literature. So we know that she actually has tried to change the entire scenario of the mainstream or the world literature by referring to such kind of thematic style or technique. And we know that she has a kind of the overlapping power, who is always trying to create not only singular home in the alien shore. There are so many homes which Jhumpa Lahiri is trying to create in the alien shore. And we know there is a kind of the overlapping. There is a kind of the overlapping of the time, place, and action. There is a pastiche of memories. There is a pastiche of that means the coalitions and the contestations of the time, space, and action. That is giving a different sort of idea. That is giving a kind of liminality. So far as diasporic subjectivity is concerned, we can get to know. And we know that this diasporic subjectivity, so far as that means Jhumpa Lahiri is concerned, can be conceptualized by bringing in Bill Ashcroft's concept of post-colonial horizontality. Because Bill Ashcroft's, according to Bill Ashcroft's, horizontality is nothing but talking about a kind of, that means circumference, where old new things are all spread together. They're opening up, and they has no particular vanishing point. There is a journey. There is a journey which has no finishing point, which Jhumpa Lahiri has probably tried to focus on. So for so far our writings are concerned, from intimate alienation to the clothing of the books, we know we know that there is a kind of alteration, there is a kind of the fluidity, there is a kind of the ambivalent existence, there is a kind of to and fro movement, continuous to and fro movement, so far as our writing styles are concerned. So in this way, we can say that how she is trying to dismantle the binary, and how she has an emancipatory potential to prove her stature as non-identity and to prove her stature as liminal. So she is trying to go beyond. So post-colonial horizontality is also talking about the rhizomatic growth of the subjectivity, which has no finishing point. And Jhumpa Lahiri is saying the same things. So she says that almost that means Flanier has Walter Benjamin's character Flanier has a tendency to exonerate herself from particular place to another, but he is bohemian. But Jhumpa Lahiri has a kind of tendency to intentionally create her existence as non-identity, as nomadic, because she is not trying to fix herself within any particular, that means cartographical and cultural epistemology. So that is the most important thing. So under the above that means in light of my discussions today, I would obviously try to cast my vision on certain, that means text taken from Jhumpa Lahiri, where I would like to focus on how this loss, gain, and destination is at work, and how there is a, that means plurality of the subjectivity is concerned, how there are so many loss, gain, and what is the condition of, that means what is the diasporic characters are looking at, and what is their ultimate and penultimate conditions, and how the future generation is actually emerging from our discussion, and what Jhumpa Lahiri is trying to mean, and what are the changes we can have standing on the present context. That are the effusion of my discussion. So I have to I have to choose certain text in order to enlighten my discussion, in order to substantiate my point of view at the same time. So first text, which that means story, which I would like to take in this connection is that the third and the final continent, which is a very important that means story, which is a part of the interpreter abilities, because we know the interpreter abilities. The subtitle is quite interesting. Interpreter of melodies, colon, Bengal, Boston, and beyond. That means, again, Jhumpa Lahiri is talking about, that means, the transgression of any kind of geopolitical and the cultural barrier, Bengal, Boston, and beyond. So again, we know that there is a kind of the transcendence. So again, we find here the third and final continent is basically referring to the third country, because here the narrator has actually completed his degree in India, and then he has shifted to UK, where he was a librarian, and then finally he has shifted to USA, America, where she usually works as a librarian at MIT. So we know that from a handbook, from a notebook rather, I should say, we know that how the American nation state ideology is being glorified. We know that it is being said that North America is quite difficult to, that means it's quite superior. It's being said how there is a kind of discovery of the moon. The two peoples are going to moon. So there is a kind of the glorification at the very beginning of this particular text, where we know that typical Americanness is being generated continuously. And we know how the name narrator, and obviously the characters, Mala and her husband, they are trying to continuously identify themselves with the host culture. But they have failed, certainly, and they are going back to the Indian culture, and they are also coming to their USA at the same time, in order to create their in order to create their existence. And they are actually talking about, or also creating, a kind of the ethnic solidarity, and they are coming to the America is also referring to the incident of 1960s incident, that means the Immigration Act, which was passed in 1960s. And in this connection, I quote from this text, and where it is being said that, I am quoting, "I lived in London in Finsbury Park in a house occupied entirely by penniless Bengali bachelors like myself, at least a dozen, and sometimes more, all struggling to educate and establish ourselves abroad." That means we can get to realize how they are trying to establish themselves in the American soil. Again, we know. And again, we find there is a kind of the ethnic solidarity they are trying to make. I'm quoting from the text, and I quote, "We lived 3 or 4 to a room, shared a single icy toilet, and took turns cooking post of egg curry, which we ate with our hands on a table covered with newspaper." So kind of the ethnic solidarity is continuously being generated in this text and celebration. And at the same time, they are returning to their own country, and they are continuously trying to identify themselves with the host culture as well. But here we find that how there is a kind of surveillance not going on, not only in the public sphere, but it becomes quite clear it is actuated in the home, that means the familial space as well. We know there is a character whose name is Mrs. Croft, who is epitomizing the Victorian conservatism, and she has always tried to impose her qualities and the characteristics upon the characters, and they are to refashion and reshape themselves within the foreign country according to the whims of that particular lady, according to the whims of the American civilization. So we know there is a kind of the panopticon gaze, there is a kind of the surveillance which has made them quite docile in this particular connection as well. But interestingly, here we find the most important thing is that how whenever they are going back to their own countries, they are trying to perform their cultural values in the American, that means USA, they become the American citizens at the same time, but they are at the same time having a kind of, they possess a kind of tension at the back of their mind regarding their only son, because Indian culture, the Indian ethnic culture is basically thinking of the togetherness we do. So they actually want to live in the crowd, they actually talking about a kind of solidarity, but American soil is basically talking about alienation, absolute alienation. So they are thinking that after their death, after whenever they will die, so what would be the condition of their son? So here we find the two things becomes quite clear in this particular connection. One is that that lady was born in 1863 onwards, that particular lady who is continuously trying to create their ethnic solidarity, and is also trying to identify themselves with the host culture, continuously trying. On the other hand, the growing up of a child on the cusp of a third millennium, so it is an emergence of the future generation, and one doesn't know what is going to happen, what is going to happen that particular son, what he will do at the end of the day. So it's a kind of the tension again we find here in this particular text, and which is mediated through the traveling, which is also mediated through the performances of one's own cultural, ethno-cultural rituals in this particular context as well, in this particular soil at the same time. So this is quite interesting, which third and final continent is actually trying to make. Then if I talk about the another interesting story, that means in Unaccustomed Earth, if we go by the Unaccustomed Earth, we know that how it is also talking about a kind of that means the differences in terms of one's own behavior. That means I'm talking about the character, significant character, whose name is Ruma. Ruma is getting married to somebody else in foreign soil, and she is continuously trying to identify herself with the host culture, and is trying to forget about her own, that means ethnic cultures. She has her own child whose name is son, whose name is Akash, and she doesn't want to make any interference on the part of anybody, especially her father. So that he is again, she is trying to, again she would recall her own mother as well as her motherland. So she is always in anxiety, she is always under threat regarding the ensuing arrival of her father. And postcard has been deployed, the concept of postcard have been deployed here, the concept of postcard has been deployed here by the Jhumpa lady in a very strategic way. And the postcard is actually bearing so many things, important significance, because the postcard is something which is an old fashioned technique, and her father has usually opted this technique. And after the demise of his, that means wife, he is, and after getting retired from her job, from his job, he has traveled so many countries. He is roaming on and on, and the tendency is to send, and he did, he has sent so many letters to her daughter Ruma. And you know that these postcards which have been sent from the various locations is nothing but indicative of the special, that means the various locations, and is actually another, it has another implication at the same time, that that particular person is continuously trying to forget her wife as well as her country. So that's why he is roaming here and there. And after 38 years later, when he has sent letters to her daughter Ruma, so Ruma feels quite disturbed, because that means the arrival of her father becomes a kind of added responsibility to her. It becomes an added responsibility to her. So she actually did not want to entertain her father's arrival to her home, because she wanted to forget her father. He wanted to forget her motherland, her mother figure. So appearance of her father, as well as that means the postcard, are nothing but actually making her quite retrogressive towards her own home culture, which she is continuously trying to ward off, forget rather. But again, this is coming here through in the guise of her father. So again, we find here that postcard has a very important significance in this particular connection, and we know at the same time that how this postcard is that means letter from various locations and becomes the container of the, that means how the postcard becomes quite important in this connection. At the same time how this postcard are creating different sort of, that means cultural dislocation. There is no particular specific, that means location, there are multiple locationality as talked about, and it actually has created a disturbance in the mind of that particular lady, and she is continuously trying to forget her roots by rerooting herself in the new soil on her own. But there is but she is not in a way able to do this because of the sudden encroachment of her father on upon her personal space. So it is a kind of the tension, and again we know that this postcard becomes quite strategic in revealing her father's secret romance with another woman whose name is Mrs. Bakchi, and it mortifies her a lot. So on the one hand, she is trying to forget her mother and the motherland, as well as her father, and it also mortifies her a lot. She won't be able to forget and won't be able to concentrate her new life in the new soil, because this pastness is actually again occupies her mind, and she is again getting alienated from her own self within this particular country at the same time. So it is another kind of alienation. We know it's a kind of the journey, it's a kind of, that means the locational antipathy, and again we know that how, that means it problematize in to create her identity, problematize in creating her identity in the alien soil at the same time. So postcard has a beautiful implications, important implication in this particular connection as well. In another text, if we go by once in a lifetime, there's another short story that means collection from taken from Unaccustomed Earth. Here we find that Hema Kaushik relationship, where Hema is a narrator, we know, and how Hema is trying to track down the loss, which is actually reflected in the second generation diasporic characters. And we find that when Kaushik's father is actually departing from, has taken the decision to depart from America to their own homeland. So we get to realize that the loss is very much there, because because Kaushik's and Hema has developed under the same, that means same sun, and under the that means they had a kind of the relationship. They have a relation because they have grown up from their infant days, from their childhood. So the sudden disappearance of Kaushik has created a scar on the mind of, that means Hema, and Hema is continuously trying to find out the roots, or she's trying to find out the location, that means roots, that means which is deeply rooted in Calcutta, and there is a prolonged absence of Kaushik's, and that has created a kind of, that means the memory, the loss, and that loss she has felt whenever she was thinking of her past memories associated with her dress code, which she wore in farewell party, and that ethnic dress code, how this ethnic dress code has helped her to create a kind of the affinity, created a kind of the affinity between her and Kaushik. So we know that loss is there, And she is also trying to, Hema, by means of her beautiful description, we know how she is trying to speculate the loss. She is trying to speculate the loss, because we know the second generation immigrants are disoriented, dislocated, and is very much propelled by the transgeneration migrants, who are, which is actually leading them to share their past memories. And it is somehow related to the concept of post memory at the same time. And if we talk about the, that means the post memory, we know that according to Merriam Hirsch, post memory, I quote, is a powerful form of memory, precisely because its connection to its object or source is mediated not through recollection but through an imaginative investment and creation. That is not to say that memory itself is unmediated, but that it is more directly connected to the past. Post memory characterizes the experiences of those who grow up dominated by narratives that preceded their birth, whose own belated stories are displaced by the stories of the previous generation, shaped by traumatic events that can neither be fully understood nor recreated. So we know that in this particular text, we know that the basic importance has been given on the description of the first generation, that how they have lost their home, how they are just trying to create their own ethnic solidarity. But when Kaushik's mother has died, and Kaushik has gets to realize it, it gets to know, and when her father comes back to America after 7 years later, we know that Kaushik's father, that means her mother, whose name is Parul Mashi, is died of cancer, and and Bela, and sorry, Hema is very fond of Parul Mashi, and we know that how the loss of that particular mother figure, or the mother of Kaushik, has created a passion, has created a kind of, that means, world where they can unite themselves, they can make themselves united in this particular space, personal space. Though it is ephemeral, it is not permanent, but they have united on the basis of loss. So it becomes quite important. So that phantom loss, and they are that, and the loss of that mother figure appears in the form of ghost in their mind, and it becomes their home, and it has a kind of the airy, it creates a kind of the airy atmosphere in their home, because they are very much, that means, surcharged by the passion of the absence of their mother. So that means that home becomes quite airy because of the absence of the mother. They are just trying to remember the existence of their mother. And we know that how they are just haunted by the spirit of their mother's spirit at the same time. And Kaushik has also shared with Hema in a discussion that after the demise of her mother wanted that her ashes should scatter on the Atlantic River. But Kaushik is somebody who is not trying to disconnect himself from the ancestral cultural values, Indian ancestral cultural values. He is trying to place herself in somewhere. She is just trying to make that particularly buried in somewhere else. So again, we find that there is a kind of, that means, the confusion which second generation diasporic characters might feel, which Lahiri has said that termed as ABCD, American born confused disease. So there is a kind of confusion because they don't know what to follow, what not to follow. So this is a kind of the difference. So this is a kind of the confusion which second generation immigrant has to face on a daily basis, because they has to follow certain as propagated by their parents at home, but they have to acclimatize themselves within in the outside the room in a new world, according to the rules and regulations of the Western society and the countries. So that creates a kind of, that means, dichotomy, the problem, or ambivalence at the same time. But here we find that in spite of growing up in the American soil, again Kaushik is getting attached to the, that means, the Indian ancestral cultural values at the same time. So he actually wants to remain intact the Indian cultural values. So that's why he doesn't want to make that lady buried in the that's why he actually wants to make that lady buried in somewhere else. So it is something which is also, that story is also dealing with loss. Though it creates a kind of the personal space, it has actually animated a kind of the passion which probably helps them to create a kind of, that means, relationship. Though, and but though this relationship is quite ephemeral, it has no, that means, particular that means that it is not permanent relationship. It has failed after a particular point of time. So again we find that there is a loss, and that loss of the mother figure has created an airy ambience, and they are just trying to celebrate this transnational loss, this phantom loss, and that has created a different sort of atmosphere in this particular text as well. So we know that how home is being generated here. There is the two important things which Avtar Bra has talked about in cartographies of diaspora. One is that home is can be generated by means of memory, and another is that this home culture can be made by means of the lived performances. So here we find that how they are also continuously trying to that means make a kind of the practice of their own ancestral culture. So they actually wanted to make a kind of the balance between these two culture here. And Jhumpa Lahiri is someone who is always talking about the balancing of the two things, and that is obviously giving a different sort of attitude so far as our writings are concerned. So again, if we look at the another story like the namesake, again we find it has a different sort of implication. So we know that in namesake, we know that the creation of the local bodies are quite important. From the discussions whatever I have made till now or hitherto, is that how that means the ethnic solidarity is being generated, how the border is also porous, because we know there are so many homes are being generated in the alien shore, and how the characters are also trying to go back to their own countries, and how there is a kind of, that means, a contestation going on, and how the characters are moving through, and that movement is nothing but talking about a kind of the loss, gain, and obviously the destination, which destination has no particular vanishing point. And here we can also find the similar thing. At the same time, we know that how the local body is generated, how the native body is generated in the transcultural encounter in the foreign soil. And we know that there are certain rituals, there are certain rites which is very much related to the ancestral Indian cultures, and these rites and rituals are containing certain cultural values, and these particular values are performed by certain South Asian of the Bengali community in the foreign territory. But the performance of these rites are actually it creates a different sort of, that means reproduce a different sort of native body in the alien soil. They I can cite an example in this particular connection. So there is an example of Annoprashan here, which is a famous festival, which is a famous rites and rituals usually happen in Bengali community. But whenever it actually is happening in that means UK, we know that this Annoprashan, whenever Annoprashan is happening, maternal uncle has to play a very important role to perform. But in the alien shore, there is no maternal uncle present. So they had to take another friend of Ganguly family, whose name is Dilip Nandi. So we know there is a kind of the improvisation. So this is the production of the native body has been made possible, but that the production of the native body cannot make any kind of any border. It is a very porous border because it demands a kind of improvisation as well. And it might also give us a different sort of glimpse that probably the second and the third generation immigrants might follow up this particular rules and rituals in the days to come. So this is how this local body is generated, how these local ceremonies and the local bars are being performed by the people belonging to by the South Asian people or the Bengali community living in abroad, how they are performing and how it has different sort of implication and how it demands improvisation. That is also getting changed. That becomes quite important in this particular connection, that the production of the native body, how it differs, that it generated in Mrs. Chen, and how it is actually differing in this particular context as well. Probably it refers to it is indicative of a certain kind of connotation. It is indicative of that it indicates, rather I should say, that the future generation probably might follow up these rules and regulations. So it is not the original rules, rites and rituals which is being performed in the Indian or the Bengali context, but here it is performed, but there is a little bit of difference. So how it is the most important thing which I would like to show in my discussion right now. And another important thing is the concept of food habit. Food becomes a very important role to play in this particular text, in other text as well, in other Lahiri's text as well, because Anita Mannur in his book The Culinary Citizenship has talked about how this national identity is being generated through food, because food is something which is very much related to the memories of one's own country, which is actually talking about the imagination. So food is something which is very much prone to focus on that past memories associated with our own ancestral culture. And at the same time, we know how the first generation immigrants are trying to find is really the first generation immigrants are very much fond of that means the Bengali food items. And we know, and here we find, I can cite an example in this connection, that how Oshima is very much fond of jhalmuri. So she is just trying to perform her own food habits, and which is actually leading her towards the Indian culture. And on the other hand, the second generation immigrants like Gogol, Sonia, and they are just trying to they are actually belonging to that means the post nostalgic period, and they are actually fond of that means tuna fish, mayonnaise, bread, butter, and things. There is no bar in taking up all these things according to Lahiri in this particular text being shown here. So there is a kind of the hybridization, and we know that this particular, that means they are actually talking about the kind of the post-national space and the neutral space, because in aeroplane, aerodrome, this space is also clear. This food items is also creating a kind of the neutral space in neutral space as well. So it is a kind of the hybridized atmosphere, which is Anita Mannur has also talked about. They are actually Gogol, Ganguly, and they are actually talking harbinger of the new kind of cosmopolitanism, different sort of racial fusion, actually, according to she actually wants to mean. So this is a new kind of technique. This is a new kind of formation of diasporic identity, which is actually happening in Jhumpa Lahiri's text as well, which I have just tried to show. Again, we know that these are the fictions and a little bit whatever I have tried to focus on. But and whenever I have just tried to cast my vision on the other works, we know that in after in so far as her writing style is concerned, we know how Jhumpa Lahiri, how does Jhumpa Lahiri bring out a kind of changes so far as our writing style is concerned or thematic style is concerned. We know if we go by her another important work, novel, that means fiction, The Lowland, we know that for the first time she has brought in a same-sex relationship, woman-woman relationship. And here she has referred to the relationship between Lorna and Gauri is an important character. And how there is that means Jhumpa Lahiri, who is always a practitioner of the heterosexual relationship throughout her works, we know that how she has talked about the heterosexual, she has focused on the heterosexual relationship, but for the first time we find there is a kind of the alteration. So a sudden changes can be located so far as her writing, the thematic style is concerned. And after the completion of that means lowland, we know that how she is actually talking about a kind of the alternative space so far as the writing is concerned, because we know that lowland has finished with a kind of the absolute alienation of the third generation immigrant called the Bela, the character, who is absolutely alienated and who feels that she is alone and she has to do her work on her own. This is the emergence of the third generation. And we know what is going to happen, we absolutely no idea. It is an open-ended text. And there is no finishing point, which is the usual characteristics of Lahiri's writing. And in her non-fictions as well, which she has started writing, in other words, if we try to talk about, we know that how she is getting attracted towards Italy, because she says in this particular text that English she was bound to learn and write, and Bengali language she was bound to learn. But Italian language is something which she loves a lot, and that's why she has just tried to grasp it and try to learn it, and is investing his time and willpower in order to attain the Italian language, and that's why she is writing right now in Italy. And at the end of that means this non-fiction, in other words, we can get to realize how she again refers to her ambivalent existence, because she feels at the end of the day, she says rather that should I stick to this Italian language, or should I go back to English language? Again, there is a kind of the tension, there is a kind of non-existent which she is trying to prove at the very beginning of her writing. Again, we find. And then interestingly, another thing is I would like to share with all of you is that in an interview with Somok Ghoshal, she has said that Italy is a very tricky place. It's geographically located between America and India. And obviously, it is opening up the possibilities. It's opening up a third space. And again, we find I've started my discussion with the third and final continent, and we find here again the third space. So she is always trying to that means exonerate herself from any kind of any cartographical epistemology on time-space continuum. Rather, she is trying to place her characters in a completely fluid ground, or rather she is trying to place her writing in a completely fluid ground. So it is obviously indicative of her indicative of the heterogeneity of the subjectivity, of the fluid subjectivity. And obviously we can get to realize how she has started changing her writing stuff is the most important thing. And at the end of my discussions, I would like to share another important thing, that we know that how the diaspora and transnationalism is, and since I have said that Jhumpa Lahiri is a transnational writer and who has celebrated translation and transnational. That's why she is. And this translational has a connection with, or whether this transnationalism has a connection with diaspora, or is there any difference? This is another important thing I would like to share with all of you. And there is a beautiful essay written by Professor Himadri Lahiri, which was published in the prestigious journal Proscriptum, where she says that diaspora, and the name of the title of the paper is The Diaspora and Transnationalism, an Awkward Dance Partner. Though it's a Feist has talked about regarding this subject, but regarding this issue, but Himadri Lahiri has tried to talk about that the diaspora and transnationalism can be considered as quote unquote cognate terms, which refers to man capital flow across the continent. So how it impacts on the man capital flow in the transcultural encounter, that is the most important thing. But Feist has interestingly made a jarring effort by referring to this that means word, an awkward dance partner. So diaspora and transnationalism, this is a kind of the awkward dance partner. So a dance partner has a kind of perfect style. It's almost like a kind of the play acting. So it has its own, that means, connotation. It has, that means, the music and the dancing should have a kind of, that means, well proportionate, that should go on hand by hand. It has its own, that means, it should be done in a very well proportionate way, so that a kind of the symphony is generated basically. But it becomes quite that means awkward dance partners. Somehow it is not, that means, meeting, it is not meeting the demands of the diaspora. Diaspora is not meeting with the transnationalism according to them. So in Lahiri's context, we can find the same scenario at the same time. I feel that each and her characters, we know, they are actually suffering from a kind of the loss. They are actually suffering from a kind of the predicament. And when diaspora means a kind of the scattering, and when scattering from one particular place to another particular place, and when this scattering has transmuted into the transcultural encounter, we know how it differs from the diaspora. It has no connection with the diaspora, but it becomes much more transnational, because there is a kind of that continuous flow going on between the global and the local, and that is giving the diasporic subjectivity a kind of the liminal existence. So it is an ongoing process. So diasporic subjectivity is an ongoing process. It is moving on and on. It has no vanishing point. So each and every place is nothing but a departure of a new place. So it is an ongoing process. So Jhumpa Lahiri is always trying to create lots of homes within the foreign soils, and she is, by means of utilizing the memories, and obviously by bringing certain cultural values, she is always trying to create the not only the ethno-cultural solidarity, but at the same time she is also talking about the transcultural world at the same time. But it is awkward because it has no finishing point. It is quite awkward because it is an open ended. We don't even know what is going to happen. So far as I have talked about the in the third and final continent, what would be the condition of the sun? In Hima and Kaushik, we don't even know what is going to happen, whether they will be able to meet again or no. We don't know. Ruma, we don't even know. He is completely segregated from a life. So again, we know the Bela in lowland, against the same thing. Again, the condition of Gogol Ganguly, we find the same situation. So far as her non-fictions are concerned, again, we find that there is a kind of liminality, there is a kind of the ambivalence. We don't even know what is going to happen. So it is completely a kind of the anxiety is there throughout her writing. And at the end, in fine, I would like to say that right now she has just tried to edit her volume, that Italian stories, where she is again trying to take different authors from the different countries. And I feel that this is another way of, that means, opening up a kind of the transgression. She is again and again trying to prove that how she becomes a kind of the global soul, who has really attained a place not only in the world literature, but she is trying to celebrate the world literature. She is again and again growing towards the global soul. That means that means she becomes global again and again. So that is the most important thing which I would like to share with all of you, with all of you. And this is what I actually want to mean throughout my discussion. So thank you everybody. That's it.
Thank you, Auritra. Thank you for this amazing, this very informative and engaging lecture. If
Thank
you
you.
allow, we may begin our Q&A session.
Sure.
Yes, I will just show the question and I also read it out to you.
Okay.
Keshav Bansali is saying, name and nickname, the familiar and the formal or strange, in the namesake have been both disassociating and assimilating marks of identity, variably for Gogol or Nikhil and Moushumi or Mose. There's other parts to this comment. And so Gogol is and so is Nikhil, but the character of Moshumi becomes assimilated by the very marks that dissociates the former. So how significant do you or insignificant do you think is the nickname with regards to the diasporic condition?
Okay. So, if I'm not wrong, this is a quite interesting question. If I'm not wrong, he is trying to focus on the question of naming, I think.
Naming, yeah.
Right. So, I will talk about this. So, I would like to I would like to say that we can interpret namesake as nameshakes because it is shaking,
Okay,
and the
yeah.
concept of naming is quite interesting because Spivak, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, has referred to a very interesting term which is called catachresis. Catachresis is actually referring to the concept of naming and named. And we know that how the Ganguly or the Gangopadhyay has cut short and has transmitted into Ganguly, and that means this is nothing but a kind of the hegemony which is being deployed by the particular nation state ideology. And we know this is that the tendency of that particular society, or that means the mainstream culture, to cut short the name is nothing but the American style. First of all, I would like to say, so the name and the naming concept of naming is very much related to a kind of the colonial, that means the colonial aspects. It is actually talking about the kind of the colonial aspects, the most important thing. Another is that whenever you are talking about the nickname, we know that this is what is called the bhalo naam and kharap naam, good name and bad name. This is which is very much prevalent in our society, in the Bengali culture. At the same time, we know that Moushami and Gogol, the taking of the Gogol is quite interesting because Gogol is a character. That means he's a writer. Is a writer taken from probably the Russian cultures. And again, we know that in during that particular time, lots of Bengali people are very much interested in reading the Russian languages and Russian literatures. So they are actually opting the Russian names, okay, in order to flourish their knowledge, so that in order to show that they have a connection with the Russian literature at the same time. Probably that is the reason, that's why Gogol, that name has taken from Gogol. Another important thing is that you will find that it has a connection with my discussion, is that Gogol, whose good name is Nikhil means Bishwa. That means she has a kind of the transgressive potential. Again, it becomes quite clear in terms of choosing the name. Nikhil means Vishwa, that means the world. It is talking about the transgression. Again, we find if we talk about Moushami is quite interesting. Moushami Jalabayu, we all know. Moshami it's a kind of, that means it's an erratic. That means Moshami is quite erratic. She is hovering here and there. We don't even speculate what she is going to do. And this is the usual condition of the second generation immigrant. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Audible, you're
Moshami
audible.
is, that means eccentric, quite eccentric. And we know that's why we know that there are so many implications so far as the naming is concerned. So that is the reason, probably that's why the writer has taken different sort of names in this particular connection as well. And if we talk about Google, and we know that Google has, that means the implication, because the that means Ashok Ganguly is very much interested in reading Russian language, and that means he has actually taken from this particular his character. He has taken this character from the Russian literature. So that is the implication of the concept of naming so far as Gogol Ganguly is concerned. That's it.
Thank you, Auritra. Before moving on to another question where other participants or viewers, Keshav has another question. I'll read that as well. Name and nickname evoke different markers of identity for Gogol and Moushumi in Lahiri's namesake. Gogol is a stranger and remains so, even as Nikhil, while Moshumi is assimilated as the mouse. How significant or insignificant do you think is this marker, variable in cases of Gogol and Moshumi, particularly in the light of the diasporic condition?
I did not get the questions actually. Hmm.
This is the first part of the question. I think,
This is the
yes.
similar question again. That means nickname
Yeah,
again.
it's kind of similar.
Similar question, repetitive questions, I think.
Yeah. How significant, insignificant do you think? Actually, we already spoke about the nickname marker
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So I think we'll move on to the next question. The next
Right.
question is by Uday Patil. Uday is asking, as a part of first diasporic generation, to how extent Ashok faced identity crisis in the novel The Namesake?
Okay. So first generation diasporic character has a kind of crisis because they Ashok Ganguly is a very educated person, we know, and she has shifted to that means UK in order to educate herself, in order to establish herself as a kind of that means person within the foreign soil. So he is continuously trying to make herself one with the host culture, but still we know since they are belonging to the first generation diaspora, so they have always a kind of tendency to that means to relocate their existence with their own that means own ancestral cultural heritages. So we find that continuously by means of by memory, by means of imagination, we know they are trying to create a kind of the home, though the home is not physically present, but mentally in their imaginative, by utilizing their imagination, they are trying to create a kind of home within UK at the same time, which has nothing to do with geopolitical or the any kind of any cartographical epistemology. So that is what they are just trying to make. That means Gokul Ashok.
Yes, thank you, Aritroda. And this multiple homes you spoke about, that is
Yeah,
also happening, right?
exactly.
In every context, where multiple homes are psychologically they're
Multiple options.
creating those. Yes,
Exactly.
and
Psychologically as well as by means of their performances.
performances. Yes,
Conch blowing ululates in ceremonies, you know, in the
yes.
alien shore. Hmm. So the
So
lived
when
experience.
it comes to their next generation, the generation who are
Yeah.
born in the part of the
Second.
diaspora, not born, no, they have no connection with. So what happens in their cases?
Hmm.
So
Jumpalari has said in a very interesting term for them, ABCD, American born confused desi, she
yes,
says.
yes, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Okay, because they don't know what to do, because at home they have to go by the rules and regulations and as proffered to them by their parents, and outside their home they have a different world where they are basically growing up. So usually that creates a kind of scar at the back of their mind. It's a kind of the generational gap, I should say, it becomes. So that's why I have talked about the post memory, because the
Yes. Yes.
generational encounter is there. It's a kind of the loss, because whatever they have come to know from their parents, it's a narratology. আমি এটা দেখেছি কলকাতায় এটা দেখেছি I was মানে they are actually telling their stories to their children, and they are actually learning from their food habits by showing their that means parents what they are just performing. Whatever they are just getting from them, it's a kind of the narration. Okay, and
Yes.
whatever they are performing outside the room, that has a different that has a different connotation, that has a different kind of existence. So it becomes a kind of that means the difference. But sometimes we find that there is a kind of that means, sometimes we know they are just trying to be like trying to conform to the rules and regulations, certain rules, particular rules they actually want to have. As I have mentioned, Kaushik is
Kaushik,
fond
yes.
of Kaushik says that I don't want to scatter ashes on the Atlantic River, though she belongs to the American society, but that is the subtle changes. But so far,
Yeah.
and at the same time, in Ashok, that means in Gogol Ganguly's case, we know that Gogol Ganguly is also trying to have the that means the different sort of food items. He doesn't like jhalmuri. So again, there is a little bit of changes. So lots of, that means, attraction and repulsion is going on, and that is the variety which diasporic subjectivity is talking about, and Lahiri has also talked about. You cannot speculate
Yes.
them on certain parameters. It is completely a kind of fluid existence of the diasporic subjectivity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the next question is by Deepankar Ghorami. Good evening, sir. I request you to elaborate the concept of hybridity in relation to the formation of identity on the part of an immigrant.
Okay. So hybridity is a general question, because we know that hybridity is basically referring to a kind of the circumference where there is a kind of overlapping or contestation between the old and the between the space and the time and the location. And I have referred to in this particular connection that how there is a hybrid culture is basically growing up in case of the namesake. On the one hand, first generation immigrant is trying to have jhalmuri. On the other hand, second generation immigrant is trying to have mayonnaise, butter, all these things. So here Jhumpa Lahiri is trying to make a kind of, that means is trying to refer to a kind of cultural syncretism. It's a kind of the assimilation of the two cultures, almost like that. And we know Vijay Mishra has says that all diasporas are unhappy, and every diaspora is unhappy in its own way. And whenever I was talking about the translation, we know that since we are the translated particles, so each and every diasporic individuals have a different experiences in the alien show. So they are trying to exalt themselves on their own. So they have their own differences, they have their own alterations at the same time. So we are talking about the multicultural world, but that multicultural world is not referring to a kind of the parochial section. And I would like to refer to, in this particular connection, Amartya Sen's book, Identity and Violence, where Amartya Sen has talked about uh, 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 monopoly of polyculturalism, monoculturalism. He has talked about the celebration of the, that means monoculturalism. So she says that it should not be like that, that each and every characters are, that means that means the cultural ethos is trying to upsurge their own voices. So in Jhumpalari's case, we know that she is always trying to make a kind of the assimilate, amalgamated domain, quote unquote, I would like to say. He is always trying to make a kind of the amalgamated domain. They are continuously making a kind of the contestation, and there is a kind of the attraction, there is a kind of the repulsion, and that has no any fixed particular point of view. So hybridization is talking about a kind of the assimilationist ideology. This association is probably leading towards dissociation at the same time. So that is what hybridity actually talks about.
Thank you, Auritra. Thank you for this very informative lecture.
Thank you.
Yes, other people have wished to be, they are very happy with the lecture. Sophia said excellent thoughts, Anuradha said candid presentation, Doc. And it was excellent presentation, truly. And
Thank
I would like to add Protein to the stream as well, if he has something to say. Yes, Pratim, you are live now. If you have something to say to Aritroda, because we
No,
don't have
I
any more
think
questions, but
no, I don't have much to say. I would like to, if we don't have any more question, I think we can conclude this session since
yes,
I don't have anything to ask.
okay. Before concluding, I'd like to know, Aritroda was talking about Spivak's, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's one theory. Can you repeat that again? Actually,
Yes.
I have not read much about that.
Catachresis.
Catachresis, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank
Catachresis,
you.
concept of naming.
Concept of
Concept of,
what exactly is that, like, how do you
that
relate
means the
to?
concept of naming and named. That means
Okay,
Ganguly. has been shortened and has been transmuted. Sorry, Gangopatta has been transmuted into Ganguly. This is
Okay.
quite
Yeah.
derogatory right now. So it is a kind of, that
Yes.
means, say
Yes.
for
Yes.
instance, Adibashi. Say for instance, Adibashi. Why
Yeah.
should we
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
it Adibashi? So this is a kind of the problem. So this Adibashi, this particular word, is generated by the colonial, those who are in power. So there is a kind of, that means, a derogatory comment. It sounds derogatory according to Spivak. So the concept of naming is very much associated with the concept of catachresis, as mentioned by Spivak. Okay,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
but
Okay. Thank you so much. And do you think the even the people who are the quote unquote in mainland, if I'm talking about in the Indian context, or in the quote unquote in the mainland India, when they are talking about the diasporic people, diasporic Indians, do they also look at them from a hegemonic point of view, from a hierarchical point of view?
obviously there is a kind of hegemony. If we talk about this way, so we know that post-colonial intellectuals, we know,
Yeah, yeah,
if we read post-colonial aura, we can get to realize that means they are saying that Jhumpa, Lahiri, the other writers, they are quite privileged. They are quite privileged because I am also South Asian. You are also South Asian.
yeah,
But if you
yeah.
go into the abroad, will you be celebrated the way they are getting the celebration?
No.
No. So they have a kind of, that means, the tactics. They have a kind of tactics to, that means, to again. And there is another is a book, probably, the anxiety of Indianness. So we know that
Yes.
somehow there is the squalid condition of the Indian society. We are always trying to represent. The writer is trying to represent through their novel, and that particular novel becomes quite hit. Becomes has got the award at the same time. Okay, so in White Tiger, we can also find the similar scenario at the same time. The
Yeah,
squalid
because
condition. We have also all the positive aspects of it, but sometimes we know that the negative aspects of our culture, or the countries, that are being celebrated by the writers belonging to the post-colonial, that means that quote unquote post-colonial intellectuals. So there is a kind of, obviously I feel there is a kind of the nation state ideology, number one. Number two, there is a kind of tendency to mimic the Western epistemology again and again. Though Partha Chatterjee is saying that we have to write from our own vantage point, but I don't think so. It will be finished very in no time. I think it will be going on, and obviously there is a kind of hegemony. Whenever you are writing, you have a kind of hegemony, obviously.
yes. Thank you for clarifying that. And now I'll request Protein to deliver the formal vote of thanks for the speaker of our day of the day. Protein, if you might.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Artrika. Um,
Thank you.
so, on behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919 and its members and executive members, I would like to convey our hearty thanks to Dr. Auritra Munshi for his excellent lecture on the topic of diasporic subjectivity. Big thank you to you, sir, for sharing your ideas and views on this area. And I would like to express our gratitude for responding to us and coming to our forum. Um, Thank you to also to our participants on YouTube for being with us today. And here we officially conclude our session now. Good night, everyone, and good night, Dr. Munshi, um, for coming here. So thank you. Big thank you to everyone.
Thank you
And
to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
yes, thank
Good
you,
night.
Artula. Thank you for this lovely
Thank you.
lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And
Good night.
uh, good night. A very good night to you.
Uh,
And for our participants and viewers, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for regular updates. Calcutta Comparatists 1919, our YouTube channel, and also check our website www.calcomp.org for our next lectures. And thank you so much.